Your cat has spun around for the fourth time tonight to bite at the exact same spot on her back leg, and there is already a small bald patch showing through the fur where there wasn't one last week. There are 5 different reasons a cat does this, and most owners spend weeks fixing the wrong one before they ever get anywhere near the one thing that actually works. Before you reach for a new shampoo or a different bag of food, there is a 2-minute check almost nobody does first, and skipping it is exactly why the scratching keeps coming back no matter what you try next. It costs nothing, it takes less time than making coffee, and it rules out the single most common reason on this whole list. If you want to follow along, grab a notebook and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Nobody teaches you this part, so if you've already bought a shampoo, a new bed, or a pricier bag of food, and the scratching is still there, that isn't on you. Most people try something before they know which of the 5 things is actually happening, which means most people start in the wrong place, not because they didn't try hard enough, but because nobody ever laid out the 5 in order first. Watching this, checking your cat's fur tonight, already puts you ahead of most owners, and it says something about how much you pay attention to her. There's a smaller myth tangled up in all of this too. A lot of owners assume scratching just means dry skin, so lotions and oatmeal shampoos become the default first move. But scratching is a symptom with 5 very different possible drivers behind it, and treating the wrong one can quietly let the real one get worse while you wait to see results that were never going to come. Before the 5, here's the quick version of what's normal and what isn't. A cat grooming herself quietly a few times a day, spread out evenly over her body. That's just being a cat. What's different is scratching at the exact same 1 or 2 spots several times an hour. A patch of thinning fur where there used to be a full coat, or skin that looks red, bumpy, or scabbed underneath. That shift from general grooming to focused, repeated attention on one spot is the line worth paying attention to. Underneath all 5, something similar is happening in the skin, even though the trigger looks completely different each time. Something irritates the surface, or the immune system overreacts to it. Certain cells in the skin release a compound called histamine, in plain terms the chemical messenger that sets off the itch signal, and the cat responds by scratching or licking. The trouble is that scratching itself breaks the skin's barrier further, which lets in more irritation and can turn a small itch into an open patch. That loop looks nearly identical from the outside no matter which of the 5 started it, which is exactly why they get confused with each other so easily. Treating the wrong one first is a bit like changing a tire because the engine light came on. The tire might be fine, the light stays on, and the actual problem just keeps running underneath the whole time you're distracted with the wrong fix. The first one is also the most common one, and it has nothing to do with what's in the bowl. Fleas. Even for a cat that has never once stepped outside. Fleas travel in on your shoes, on a visiting dog, on a jacket brought in from the cold, and once they're on your cat, a single bite is enough to set off an intense reaction in a sensitive one. This is where most people get it wrong first. They assume an indoor cat is automatically safe from fleas, and that assumption is exactly why the flea gets missed for weeks, while every other product in the house gets blamed instead. Here's the 2-minute check. Run a flea comb through the fur at the base of the tail and along the lower back, then tap whatever comes off onto a wet paper towel. If the little dark specks turn reddish-brown, that's flea dirt, and it means fleas, not dry skin, not the food, are the most likely thing behind the scratching. It's a small, slightly gross, oddly satisfying detail once you know to look for it, and it decides almost everything else you do next. If that test comes back positive, flea prevention dosed for your cat's weight and life stage, kitten, adult, or older, from your veterinarian is the next move, and it usually matters more than anything else on this list. Left alone, the itching from flea bites can turn into a much bigger reaction called flea allergy dermatitis, where the skin stays inflamed and raw from just a few bites, so this isn't a step to skip, even if you only found 1 or 2 specks on the towel. That's reason 1, ruled out or confirmed in under 2 minutes. If it's clear, or the itching is clustered somewhere very specific instead of spread everywhere, The next reason lives inside the bowl instead of the fur. If any of this is landing, this is usually the point where subscribing and hitting like actually makes sense, not before you knew any of it, but now that you've got a real answer for tonight. It helps this kind of information reach more owners standing over their own cat, wondering the exact same thing. The second reason is a food allergy, almost always to a specific protein, and it tends to show up differently than a flea problem does. Instead of scratching all over, you'll usually see it concentrated around the head, the ears, and the neck, a cat pawing at her own face more than her back or her tail. This one doesn't get solved by switching to a new bag at random, because a new bag with the same protein source, just a different label on the front, changes nothing at all. What actually helps here is an elimination approach, feeding a single new protein source consistently for several weeks, following your veterinarian's guidance on exactly how strict that needs to be and for how long, to see whether the itching around the face actually eases. It's slower than switching foods on a whim, and slower is exactly why it works, because it's the only reliable way to find out which protein was ever the problem in the first place. One common mistake here is switching proteins every few days out of frustration when nothing seems to change fast enough. That resets the clock every time, and a cat's digestive system doesn't get a fair test if the food keeps moving before it's had a chance to prove anything either way. Picture a cat, we'll call her Luna, an indoor shorthair whose owner noticed a small bald patch forming right at the base of her tail one weekend. A flea comb over a paper towel showed the reddish-brown specks confirming flea dirt, even though Luna had never once set paw outside in her life. Her owner started a flea plan guided by their vet and added a daily dose of sardine oil to her food, and within about 3 weeks, the scratching had eased enough that the fur at the base of her tail had started filling back in on its own. So that's 2 down. Here's where it gets interesting, because reason 3 is the one most owners assume is the whole story from the very start, and it's actually just one piece of a much bigger picture. Dry, flaky skin, sometimes paired with a slightly dull coat, often points to not enough omega-3 in the diet. Cats need these fatty acids to keep the skin's natural barrier working the way it should, and without enough of them, the skin gets irritated by things that wouldn't normally bother it at all. Think of it like a hinge that squeaks more the drier it gets. Oil it, and the friction eases. Skip it, and every little movement grinds a bit louder than it needs to. A small amount of fish or sardine oil added to food daily, dosed by weight, tends to help. A kitten needs less. An adult gets a standard daily amount, and an older cat often gets a slightly lighter amount, depending on how her kidneys are doing, which is exactly the kind of detail worth confirming with your veterinarian rather than guessing. Comfort in the skin often improves within about 2 to 4 weeks, not overnight. And if it hasn't shifted at all by then, that's worth mentioning at her next checkup rather than doubling the dose on your own. Here's the part that matters most about reason 3. This same daily habit, fish oil supporting the skin from the inside, keeps helping even when one of the other 4 causes turns out to be the real trigger. Calmer, better supported skin simply reacts less to almost everything else on this list, which is exactly why it becomes the one thing this whole video is building toward. Reason 4 shows up on a schedule, worse at certain times of year than others. Dust, pollen, and other things floating around the house can trigger an environmental reaction in a cat, almost the way hay fever works in a person, except a cat can't blow her nose, so the reaction shows up on the skin instead. If the scratching gets noticeably worse during a particular season and eases up the rest of the year, this is usually the one behind it. Vacuuming more often during high pollen or dust periods, washing her bedding weekly, and following whatever plan your veterinarian sets for a confirmed sensitivity are the practical pieces here. It's less about one single fix and more about lowering how much of the trigger she's exposed to in the first place, week over week. And then there's reason 5, the one that has nothing to do with skin at all, at least not at first. Stress-driven overgrooming, sometimes called psychogenic licking, is what happens when a cat licks the same spot so consistently that a bald patch appears, not because the skin itself is irritated to begin with, but because something in her routine has her on edge. A move, a new pet in the house, a schedule that suddenly changed, any of these can be enough to set it off. It doesn't feel dramatic from the outside. It just looks like a cat that grooms a little too much in one specific spot, which is exactly why it tends to get missed longest of all 5. A cat named Baxter started licking his belly raw every single time his owners went out of town for work. Once their travel routine settled into something more predictable and play sessions became consistent again, the licking calmed down on its own over the following weeks, though his owners still had the raw patch checked by their vet first, just to be sure nothing physical was hiding underneath the stress. Predictable play sessions, some vertical space for her to climb and observe the room from, and a steady daily routine tend to help with this one specifically. Not a cure, just less pressure on a nervous system that's been running a little hot. 5 reasons down. And if you've noticed one thing keeps repeating, no matter which of the 5 turns out to be true for your cat, you're already ahead of where this video started. A few numbers worth keeping because they're the ones that actually change how you'd act tonight. Fleas are considered the single most common trigger behind itchy skin complaints that bring cats in to see a vet at all, well ahead of any of the other 4. A single bite is genuinely enough to set off a reaction in a sensitive cat, not a full infestation, just one bite. And a consistent daily omega-3 habit is commonly reported to ease itching within roughly 2 to 4 weeks, which is worth remembering before deciding a supplement isn't working after 4 days. Here's the one thing, the piece that ties almost every case on this list together. Rule out fleas first, always first, because it's the most common cause and the cheapest one to check in 2 minutes with a comb and a paper towel. Then add daily omega-3 as ongoing skin support, regardless of which of the other 4 turns out to be the real driver, because calmer, better supported skin reacts less to nearly everything else on this list. In the vast majority of itchy cat situations, one of these 2 moves is quietly doing most of the actual work. There's a rule worth following once you start acting on any of this, because a cat's stomach is more sensitive than it gets credit for. Don't change the food, add a supplement, and start a flea treatment all in the same week. Rule out fleas first, alone, for about 2 weeks. If that comes back clear, add the omega-3 as a steady daily habit. Only after that, if the signs still point toward food, start the elimination approach on its own, one change at a time, so you can actually tell what helped instead of guessing at all 3 together. A word on what to never do here, because it matters more than any of the 5 reasons on their own. Never use essential oils around a cat, not on her skin, and never in a diffuser running in the room. Cats don't have the liver enzymes to break down the compounds in oils like tea tree, peppermint, citrus, or eucalyptus, and even just breathing them in has caused drooling, tremors, and liver damage in cats, sometimes without ever touching the oil directly. Never use a flea product made for dogs either. The ingredient in most of them is toxic to cats specifically, even in a tiny amount. Onion, garlic, chocolate, grapes, and raisins, and xylitol stay off the table regardless of what's driving the scratching. And if there's ever an open wound, a bald patch that keeps growing instead of shrinking, or itching that isn't easing after a couple of weeks of doing everything right, that's the moment to stop guessing. Let your veterinarian confirm what's actually going on, sometimes with a simple skin check that only they can run properly. It's worth saying plainly, a lot of what fills the pet aisle is built to sell to every itchy cat at once. One bottle marketed as the answer, no matter which of the 5 is actually happening underneath. Checking for flea dirt costs nothing. A bottle of fish oil costs very little. Neither one gets the shelf space or the packaging that the flashier products get, and that's not really a coincidence, it's just not what sells. Left alone, none of these 5 stay small forever. Fleas multiply fast in a home once they've found their way in, and a small population becomes a much bigger one within weeks. Scratched, broken skin opens the door to infection on top of whatever started it. A bald patch that began the size of a coin can spread as the same spot keeps getting worked over and over. And a stress habit that's gone unaddressed can outlast whatever originally caused it, becoming its own pattern long after the stressor itself is gone. None of that is meant to scare you. It's just the honest shape of what happens when the itch-scratch cycle keeps running unchecked in the background. It's also worth knowing the itch rarely stays contained to just the skin. Some food sensitivities that show up as scratching carry digestive upset along with them, so a change in her stool can be a clue too. Long-term flea infestations can lead to anemia in kittens and smaller cats from ongoing blood loss, which is part of why they're never worth ignoring even in a mild case. And a cat that isn't sleeping well because she can't stop scratching tends to be a little more off in her mood and her appetite as well, even if nobody connects the two right away. Once things do start improving, whichever reason it turned out to be, the habit doesn't need to stop. Keep the flea prevention on schedule year-round rather than only during warmer months. Keep the daily omega-3 going as ongoing support rather than stopping the moment the fur grows back. And keep an eye on whichever season or situation triggered things this time, because most of these 5 tend to circle back if the underlying habit quietly gets dropped once things look fine again. So here's what tonight actually looks like, in order. Run the comb, check the towel. If it turns reddish-brown, that's fleas. And a call to your vet about a plan sized to her weight is the next move. If the towel comes back clean, watch where the itching concentrates. Face and neck point toward food. Seasonal spikes point toward the environment. One obsessively licked spot with no other explanation points toward stress. And underneath, whichever one it turns out to be, daily omega-3 is quietly doing work in almost every version of this story, which is exactly why it's the one thing worth starting tonight, regardless of which of the 5 ends up being true. Comment which of the 5 you think is behind your own cat's scratching right now. Just the number, 1 through 5, no explanation needed. Just curious how common each one turns out to be among everyone watching this tonight. If any of this helped, subscribing costs nothing, and it means the next one of these lands in front of you without you having to go looking for it later. Whichever one it turns out to be for your cat, here's hoping tonight is the night the scratching finally starts to ease. And here's a scratch behind the ears for her from me, wherever she's curled up right now.